Hey everybody, welcome back to Carbon's DIY Garage. Today we are going to be replacing the two front engine mounts. They're just 3 total bolts. 2 of them go into a bracket on each side and 1 through bolt that connects it to the bracket that is on the engine. It should be a pretty straightforward process, right? Well, in theory, yes, but getting access to them is a little bit of a challenge, but not too terrible. The through bolt and the top bolt you can get from the top. This is the passenger side. And a little bit more challenging is the driver's side underneath the intake manifold. You can see it just there. And if you watched my video on replacing the exhaust, I showed you what at least the driver's side mount looks like. So it's time for these to be replaced for sure. And let's go after it. Okay, so I have put the jack underneath the engine and not lifting it up really, just holding it in place. And if I need to raise it or lower it a little bit to get those through bolts out, I'll do that, but this is just to keep the engine from dropping. Well, for sure, the hard part is removing the old rusty bolts. This Jeep has 204,000 miles on it, and I used PB Blaster. I really tried hard, but unfortunately, this is what happened to the bolt on the bottom of the mount. Sheared right off. I tried everything I could to not let that happen, but thankfully the new mount does have all new bolts and things like that. And I'll put a link in the description of the video of what I'm using, but no choice now but to proceed with replacing at least the driver's side mount. First thing I wanted to do is break torque on all the bolts, and I broke torque on the top. That was pretty easy, but the bottom, obviously the bolt itself broke. So anyway, let's keep going. All right, bolt is out. So coming up and out is not really gonna work, I don't think, so I'm just gonna shove it down. There we go. Just to show you the old mount versus the new mount. Here's the old one with the broken bolt stud, and it is pretty much destroyed. Compare that to the new one. Lots of life left here, but clearly needs to be replaced. So the lessons learned on the driver's side mount is first connect the mount to the frame and get those 2 bolts snug, and that way you can raise and lower the engine over top of the mount, the engine mount. If you don't do that, then the engine mount moves around and it's not going to line up right. So do that first, and then you need to I had to go through this iterative process of raising and lowering the engine to get it to where the engine for bracket holes would line up with the through holes in the engine mount to get the bolt in. That just took a lot of iterations with the jack that I didn't want to bore you with. So now all that's left is torquing the bolts down. The 2 bolts that hold the mount to the frame, that's 46 foot-pounds, and then that through bolt gets 51 foot-pounds. On the passenger side, the bolt will hit the alternator if you try to take the engine mount off with just like I did on the driver's side. So it looks like you have to take the bracket off the engine in order to get the mount replaced. So that's what we're gonna do. Like I said earlier, you can't take that through bolt out because the condenser for the air conditioning and the alternator are in the way of doing it, just like you do on the driver's side. The service manual says to take the bracket and the mount off of the engine as one assembly. And you can do that. There's 2 nuts and there's 2 bolts on this side They're all 9/16 inch socket. 3 of them are really easy to get to, but there's one, I won't be able to show it to you, but it's between the mount and inside that bracket. And you really need to have a flexible box wrench to get in there and get it. And I just don't have that. And I've been struggling for a long time to figure out how to do this. Finally, I have taken the alternator off of its bracket and shifted it. I didn't disconnect any of the cabling, but just shifted it way up front. And then there's just barely, you can see the through bolt is still hanging in there just for a little bit, but there's barely enough room to get that through bolt out, and then we should be able to get the engine mount out without taking that bracket off. And of course, if you're doing that, make sure you disconnect the negative battery terminal. You don't want that alternator causing you problems. So we're gonna continue. Hopefully it goes smoother from this point on, but oh, that was rough. Lordy, that thing fought me all the way. It didn't even want to come out. I had to put some extra muscle on it just to get it out of there once it was all freed up. So that's, on the left is the new one, on the right's the old one. The old one doesn't really look that bad. And then the one on the left is the passenger side old one, and the one on the right is the driver's side old one. Obviously the driver's side one was dead. So now I'm gonna go do the reverse to install the new one. Hopefully it goes more smoothly now that I kind of know what I'm doing with getting the engine in just the right spot and then putting that alternator back on. So we'll see how it goes. Well guys, now that this project is done, I'm not gonna lie to you, it has worn me out. I did not expect this to be an all-day project for these two little stupid rubber things. But that passenger side was definitely harder than the driver's side. The concept's the same, but probably the easiest way to do it, I think, is to take the alternator off of its bracket, which means taking the serpentine belt off and pulling that through bolt off from the front and not trying to take that brace or bracket off of the engine. Also had some trouble getting everything lined up to put that through bolt back in. Not only did I need to move it up and down, but I also needed to use one of my larger wrenches to wedge it between the bracket and this mount to force the motor to move over a little bit so that it would line up, because these holes are exactly the right size for the bolt and there's not a lot of give. So it took quite a while to get it all lined up. Once I got the sweet spot, it slid right in, and from there it's just torquing it down. Of course, lots of great ideas for torque values, but getting a torque wrench in there is a whole nother matter. Anyway, it sounds great, and it actually sounds a lot better when it's running than it did before I replaced the engine mounts. And the engine is sitting up a little bit higher too. So was it worth it? I really think so. But don't expect it to go only an hour, at least if you have a Jeep like mine. So TDSR, one more project behind us, many more to come. If you liked the video, found it useful, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel to keep seeing more videos as they come. If you have comments or questions, drop them in the comment section below. And like I said, a link in the description for the mount that I used for the project today. Have a good one.